Welcome to my Only One Outlier podcast show, where I'll be exploring the data science career tips with the industry experts who can share their experience and journey with us. I am your host Nirmal, from a new grad to an early career data scientist, from a data analyst to a data engineer, or anyone who wants to start or transition their career into data science. We will bring you all the do's and don'ts to help you guide in your data career path. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my Only One Outlier podcast. So, joining us today is a remarkable person, a friend of mine. We worked together during one of our career stage in VMware, and she has been doing a lot of good work in the intersection of security and AI, which is obviously the cutting edge work that bridges those two big sectors, right? She has a proven track record of developing and operationalizing AI solution in the threat detection, automation, and analyst augmentation. She's also passionately giving back to community through mentoring and knowledge sharing. Please join me welcoming Preeti Ravindra to my show. Thank you for coming here today.
Hey, Nirmal, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I know you have a lot of other people as well, so I definitely feel good being in the ranks as some of the other guests.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, whenever I thought about this idea of doing podcast, I already had few peoples on my mind who I'm going to invite, and you were one of them because part of it is talking about AI and suggesting people how do they come into this career field and things like that. At the same time, there's various domains that AI is applicable, and security is one of them. Myself being in security, I might be a little bit biased to like the domain, but I love people coming and talking about that. So I did a quick intro, and it was based on what I knew about you. I just don't want it to steal your thunder. So you are the one in the stage to introduce yourself in a little bit better way. So tell us who Preeti is, in a little bit deeper way on your understanding.
Sure, absolutely. So I think you already did a great job giving an intro, but if I have to talk a little bit about myself that's not perhaps visible on my LinkedIn profile or on my website,
Mhm.
it's that I have been working at the intersection of AI and security, and I totally stumbled upon this intersection. It was completely unintentional. I started off as a security researcher, and then I was there was like this one particular problem that was bothering me a lot, and I needed some non traditional solutions for that problem. And that's when, one of my colleagues and I, we were talking about, oh, can we use like some syntax trees or can we use like natural language processing? And then we tried one of those approaches, and that approach kind of stuck. And since then, I kind of caught the bug, the bug of machine learning. And since then, I've been like, okay, let's explore this space. This is interesting. There are some ways in which it can solve problems, and there are some ways where it may not necessarily be the best fit.
Mhm.
So I definitely use or think about, be it statistics, machine learning, or AI, as a tool to solve a problem. I also tend to be like business and outcome focused.
Mhm.
So I definitely think about the best ways to solve a problem with a given tool, and to also kind of match the right kind of problems with the right kind of solutions. And I think AI right now is it's being used in a lot of places. Very good applications are coming around, and some applications make me think, is this really a wise use of AI? And then there are some applications where that's how I thought initially, but then later I've been proved wrong. So,
Mhm.
anything goes, and it's always kind of nice to see how the space evolves.
Yeah, totally agree with you. I also sometimes pause and ponder, is this right tool? I mean, traditional ML is almost out of the window, like, at least from people's mind, and they sometimes neglect or at least don't realize the power behind it. Using the right tool for the right use case or problem is the most important piece, I guess.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. And don't get me wrong, I still love being at the forward-looking side of
right.
things, right? Like right now, my most recent work is still around how do we leverage generative AI? Where does it make sense from a strategy perspective? Like my
Hmm.
most recent role was at a managed detection and response company where I was trying to develop and hone that strategy to see how we can best make use of this technology. There's always something new. And on the flip side, having a security mindset and a security background makes me also think about the ways in which certain things can be exploited, right?
Right.
So ML and AI security, like securing those solutions itself is another big aspect. And that's also something that I'm quite passionate about.
Okay, yeah, maybe we can chat a little bit about that later. So down the line. So your journey to data science, right? So you touch it upon a little bit. Everyone stumbles to data science, and even I look at my own path. Most of my guests that I have invited, they never thought in their earlier career that they will be a data scientist or like an AI researcher or something in the field of AI, right? So it's not because AI was not there. It's because they were trying to figure out or navigate their career path in different ways, and then they will come to where they are today, right? So I wanted to hear a little bit about your journey to data science and how cyber, at what point of time cyber got tagged along and you became a cybersecurity data science person. So
Yeah, sure. I sometimes keep joking that, like all the security folks think that I'm a data scientist and all the data folks think that I'm a security engineer. So I
that's a good one.
sometimes I joke about that. I want to say I think it was mostly because of the challenges that I saw on a day-to-day basis when I'm working. Some of the questions that I get is like, hey, what got you into this space, right? Like, how did you come about this? And most of the times, my answer is truly don't wait for somebody to give you a project. Sometimes just see where you can solve a problem and see what kind of a solution is good for that. And a lot of my opportunities or career opportunities has been sort of doing jobs that later became data scientist title, that later became an AI engineer title,
Hmm.
right? So when I was first developing a model, it was like a statistical model. Yes, I became a data scientist. And then after that, we wanted to leverage deep learning. And that's when that title of like an AI researcher did not exist at that point in time in the industry that I was working in.
Hmm.
So I just did that and I got that role. And when we worked together, there was a need for the team to not only develop models, but also to operationalize those models.
Right.
The need of the hour is to operationalize the models. I thought, okay, why not try my hand at doing some of the engineering work and doing some of the operationalization aspects of it. So that's how it came about, right? Like it's really about sometimes doing the jobs that are ill-defined, and even if you feel uncomfortable,
Hmm.
just do that and see where the journey takes. And I think I'm very grateful for all those opportunities that I've had in my career.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. So yeah, things come along, and if you identify what is the need of the hour, that the one that you highlighted, I really agree. And you need to be able to pick up the skills, come out of comfort zone if you need to, and and learn it, right? So I have seen people evolving different titles. Even their own title may not evolve. That's okay, but your responsibilities always evolve, right?
Yes,
So you need to probably ramp up and keep your eyes open to learn new things. I think that's what it is ultimately.
absolutely.
Yeah, you said about opportunities, and it always have a flip side of challenges to it, right? So, what are some of the challenges that you faced during your journey? I mean, there could be many, but if you can highlight a couple and maybe how you overcome it, maybe our audience, if they are going through similar challenges, they will kind of relate to it and get useful to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the challenges, especially when you're navigating like an interesting niche space, is
Hmm.
that there are not a lot of people in that space in the first place. It
Yes.
is difficult to identify the right kind of resources, the right kind of direction. And you also probably don't know where your career is going to be going. So planning long term right away might be difficult. In terms of tapping resources, I think one of the obstacles that I overcame was that initially I thought, oh, there are not a lot of people in this field, right? And then later, I went to a bunch of conferences and then I met similar like minded people. And then there are people like you who are kind of like posting on LinkedIn with the relevant resources, right? That's important. That's
Yes.
absolutely important to just create that awareness. You may not know the depth of a particular topic, but just having awareness and some sort of a compass guiding you, you know what, maybe that's the next thing that I want to learn about, right? So having that, I think, is very important. And another aspect is, I would say, getting feedback from different types of stakeholders that you work with. As a data scientist, you're constantly working with engineering, you're constantly working with product, and nowadays even legal teams,
Oh
because
yeah.
there are like lots of risks of doing
Hmm.
machine learning and AI
Yeah, yeah.
in a vastly in a fast-paced setting. So talking to all these people in some sort of shared vocabulary is definitely a skill that I have acquired. And it's not a skill that came about very easily. I think I definitely put myself in some of those situations.
Hmm.
And even if I may not have had the perfect first or few responses, I think just having those dialogues with different stakeholders definitely helped broaden my horizons in terms of what people should be thinking about when they're using data science to solve a problem. And even in terms of like the skills, right? There are some times where having the best algorithm is better. There are some times when having the right kind of explainability is better, right? All of these trade offs are interesting decisions to make, and you will have an opportunity to do this only when you come across like some of these challenges. So in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to say is, I think there are opportunities that create challenges, and those challenges will create opportunities.
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree. You touched upon a really good point there. I kind of wanted to extend a little bit on that was the interaction with stakeholders and how you find that common vocabulary across the folks. Because data scientists, I agree, will sit mostly on a very central core point where we touch upon many stakeholders, right? One of the thing in my own career also, I felt like when I was lagging in my early career was to build that relationship with different stakeholders, or in a way, how do I talk in the same language of framing the problem, right? I may have to just forget about being a data scientist completely when I'm formulating a problem, because at that point of time I have to act like a stakeholder and try to understand the pain points, right? So that's what ultimately will bring what problem can be solved by AI or ML. And then once you start working on the project, you always have to put yourself in these shoes, I guess that's probably the right way to say it. If you don't understand the customer's main issues or pain points, like you said, ML is just a tool, not used properly in the right problem, we might not be exploring it in the right way. So what are your suggestions to maybe the newcomers in the data field who is in their early career, and what can they do to build the soft skills? I wanted to hear your quick thought on that.
Yeah, that's a very good question, especially if somebody is kind of looking to break into the field or entering the field.
Hmm.
I think one of the things that I alluded to before, which is, do not wait for the projects to come in your lap, right?
Hmm.
Even when it comes to like selecting portfolios, a lot of people ask me questions around, hey, what should I put on my portfolio?
Yeah.
I think the best way is to find some problem that's bothering you. I personally find AI and machine learning extremely great for personal productivity. Like, we have seen proliferation of a lot of solutions for personal productivity. Maybe that could be one interesting project to start off with right away. And even if you're the only stakeholder, sometimes pitching your own solution or open source project, just putting that out and asking people for features, I think that itself can be a great idea. So even as a student, or even as somebody who's looking to break into the field, and if you do not have business stakeholders around you, just put the project out there and automatically you will see some issues slowly coming up, or kind of register yourself to introduce your tool in some sort of a workshop setting. Go to schools and try to teach how to use some of these tools to other people, and you'll automatically see a lot of people asking questions. And that's when you will realize how to respond and meet the customers where they're at, right? Like, a question from somebody at a school might be so different because the way they use some of these tools will be very different. And a question that's coming from business stakeholders might be very different. So you'll have to learn to speak at their levels.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest that is a good way of exposing yourself to such situations, or even intentionally putting yourself in such situations. So that is one thing that I would say. And the other aspect is maybe try out different roles. Like, one of the best ways to know is, like, if you're a data scientist and you've always wondered why your software engineer is constantly asking, like, have you Dockerized your application? Do you know how much memory you will need? That's because they have to plan for those
Yes.
requirements, right? Because they have to engineer their solutions based on that. If you say you need memory, then I have to plan for my caching mechanisms. And in the cache, I need to figure out this system architecture. And all of that is needed for your idea to eventually see the light of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes just put yourself in their shoes and do their job. And just by doing their job, you'll have more empathy.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. So I think this is a good segue to next question that I have. There is a definitely stigma of job hopping versus the career growth, and you touched upon a little bit right before this question is you need to explore multiple responsibility path for you to get more challenges, and at the same time you are more skilled in doing things. At the same time you're also understanding their side of the work, so if I'm working with engineering team to integrate my data science model to their platform, until and unless I understand from their side, like, hey, why are they doing this way? Why do they need the YAML file from me? And I'm just giving them the model. Why do I have to give them all this other service related metrics for my model? I have a performance related metrics. My model is 90% accurate. Why do they care about these other things? Because they have to serve the model, right? So until and unless I understand the ML engineering aspect, I won't fully feel that. So in my career also, I have thought that, hey, like, there's no rule of thumb for 1 year, 2 year in a job. For me, I would rather to take it as if this is a right fit role for me, and if something down the line, if I'm looking for my long term goals to be achieved, is this role is going to suffice me or not, right? If not, then I'll probably look for opportunity to be in that another layer of the responsibility that I wanted to tackle the challenges on, right? So I have seen even on your career, you have a similar path where you have always maybe made some trade off between like leaving the job too soon versus the career growth. So let's talk a little bit about this. I think this is very growing hot topic in the market, and my mentees sometimes ask like, hey, is there any rule of thumb or the number that I should stick with the company so the recruiters are not thinking me in a different perspective, so, and I don't have a right answer.
No, thanks for that. I think there is no right answer. It is definitely very subjective and also very circumstantial, because it's not just about your career, you also have to think about your life.
Right.
And you have to see what is the right thing for you and your family at a given point in time,
Hmm.
while still advocating for your growth. I want to say, yes, I have made some transitions. Some of them were successful, some of them were not so successful.
Right.
I'm totally okay admitting that, yeah, probably that was not the right decision. So the
Hmm.
way I think about it is, generally there's I call this like the push or the pull. And sometimes the recruiters are also trying to probe you to get whether you're trying to run away from a particular job or like jumping towards another job.
Right.
So I call it like the push and the pull phenomenon. In terms of the push or the pull, like, sometimes, yeah, you may have truly landed in a place where you don't think you're a good cultural fit, or you just don't think that the work is exciting you. That happens. And it's totally okay to advocate for yourself and find that right opportunity. And sometimes there are opportunities where you're very excited and things are working really well, but then there are always like there are like ebbs and flows, right? So sometimes work is like really fast moving, and then sometimes you've just hit like a lull period, and that's when you start thinking about, oh, maybe I should change my job now. And in that case, that's when I say, think about it more, like, think about it from an impact perspective. I think that's what I would say. If you can tell what it is that you got out of the job and how you contributed,
Hmm.
and if you're happy with the impact that you've made, then maybe that's a good time for you to challenge yourself with some other opportunity. However, if you feel like you still have a lot more to give and you still have a lot more to learn from a given job, then that's totally fine. I would definitely say, like think about it in terms of the push versus the pull. That is one aspect. And the other one is also like the type of industry and the type of companies that you choose. Sometimes
Right.
they can also have a bearing. For example, if I wanted to do all these different types of roles, sometimes picking a bigger company where you have all those different kinds of roles, where you can ask for those roles and get it, may make sense because they have that presence.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you could also rationalize and say, oh, but if I'm at the smaller company, I can just do everything by myself,
Yeah.
right? And I can also try out all these different roles. So it's really about figuring out the push and the pull and the nature and the company size where you want to do. So sometimes I found myself that, okay, there is no room for growth. There is no opportunity for me to try doing something in the place where I want to do. And that's when I seek out. And then there are some times where I just feel like it's not a great cultural fit. And that's when I seek out other opportunities. In terms of stigma and impact on resume, I think everybody has understood, like, for the past 4 years, things have been crazy. We've had like the pandemic and
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
had different changes in the economy. I think everybody understands, like, we're all going through a phase in a way. So I think a lot of people do understand what's happening. And I've also noticed that many recruiters nowadays or companies nowadays care more about what you can do and why you're interested, as opposed to like, why were you there for only like 1 year or 2 years, like,
Right.
as opposed to having those kinds of questions. And if they're asking those kinds of questions and if you think that's kind of, hindering you, then maybe that's a good thing. That's a good indicator for you to also examine cultural.
Yeah, it's a very good point. That's what I actually tell my mentees too. Like, I may not have the exact right answer, but there are a few things I can suggest. Is just like what you explained. There are many dimensions actually in this decision making process, right? So there could be compensation for someone, there could be work life balance for someone, cultural fit. What are your priorities? I think that is important at the first place. And then obviously growth and the thing that you wanted to do, the impact that you are making, like you said, all those is making sense or not. And I tell folks that, yeah, never hesitate to make a decision. I mean, it's not gonna put any dent or anything on your resume. And like you said, these days people have understood quite a bit than how it used to be. The perspective has changed. Even my conversation in past with recruiters versus when I have some conversation now, they are very well understandable now, right? Like, hey, I mean, things could change. Ultimately, it's the job seekers also has their stake on the conversation. You have to just be transparent and explain, I wanted to do something and it didn't end up happening that, right? As long as you have a strong justification, which you should have. If not, then you shouldn't be changing job anyway, right? So yeah, I think it's good that we kind of covered that. It is one of the topic that has been coming up in my conversations with the folks. So we covered that.
Yeah.
All right. So now I have one more topic, which is more like, let's switch a gear around coming to AI and the latest trend. And you have been in many positions like where you have a right to select the tools. Maybe you also have your vote on this is the technology we should use, or versus the I see that where you already have a tools and set up and we just work on those existing tools. What is one of the fascinating tool or idea or anything that is coming up from today's, I mean, I usually call it Gen AI burst, so that you have found yourself very fascinated towards.
Sure. At least with generative AI, I think when people think about generative AI, mostly people think about language models.
Hmm.
But there's like so much more to generative AI than just language models, right? There's like
Right.
multimodal aspects. Then there are like all these cool diffusion models that are out there. I think all of these are very interesting.
Hmm.
In terms of the most fascinating tool or technology, I would say I'm currently quite intent on or quite keen on identifying how to evaluate a lot of these models. And by that, I don't just mean
Hmm.
benchmarking.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely have benchmarks coming out. There's like always things like MMLU.
Mm-hmm.
There are things like, like the HelloSwag,
Mm-hmm.
Hardbench. You have like so many of those model specific benchmarks.
Mm-hmm.
But when we are thinking about applying a problem to a particular space, like take in the case of security, like let's say we're developing an agent which can help in investigation, or
Mm-hmm.
let's say we're developing some sort of a tool that can help us summarize incidents, almost very similar to co-pilots, right, in
Mm-hmm.
any other use case. How do we go about evaluating the end outcomes of some of these applications, not just the model itself, but how do we go about evaluating whether they're truly offering the benefits that we think they're offering? So I think there's a lot of good and interesting work that can be done there outside of having metrics like RAGAS or outside of just doing benchmarking.
Right.
I think there's some good interesting work that's coming out there. And in terms of like what I'm excited about using AI for, I would definitely say at this point in time, I'm particularly fascinated about using language models for any sort of phishing related use cases in the
Mm-hmm.
security domain. And that's because I think it's like a natural strength, right? Language models are language, and like the phishing typically tends to be a lot around language. So I think it's a great strength there. And the other aspect that I'm quite interested in is doing some sort of an assistant or doing some sort of automated context and pivot provisions. Security folks always think about, if I look at one particular indicator, I'll pivot into something else.
Right.
And that pivot, understanding that pivot is actually a reasoning step. So it models very well to like chain of thought processes or
Yes.
react processes. So those agentic aspects, I think, are going to be very interesting. I mean, these agents have existed for a long time, but I want to really see the value that they have in real life, in production. I would absolutely love to see what value they bring. And other than that, I think there's like a lot of new noise around distillation and finding values in smaller models. So,
Mm-hmm.
kind of excited about that as well, because we can definitely have some specialized
Yes.
smaller models achieve great results, which can be very good from a business standpoint because they can give more ROI if you don't have to like spend billions of dollars building out the infrastructure.
Yeah, I think the SLM or the small language models, if from the fine tuning perspective, right? So if we have to kind of fine tune on cybersecurity related topics, or like it's a little bit different than how you kind of look the problem from same language aspect, right? The language may be different, command lines are different, the way cyber language comes in different. So, but instead of trying to boil the ocean and put a large language model to fine tune, you don't even know if it is probably going to be a right model after we did it. So, and you're already burning your resources, right? You can try out from these small language models. And I mean, it's just funny to say small language models, we say it's small, but they are also like billions of parameters, right? At this stage.
Exactly, exactly. And also, it's funny because you're absolutely right, because most everybody was mostly like introduced to AI through ChatGPT or like
Yeah.
transformers,
Yeah.
right? So large language models is so common that you have to like qualify things that are not large language models.
Yeah, yeah. Just like how you said the Gen AI, people think it's always LLM. I mean, actually, that's a good. If people say it's LLM, it's actually better for better decision. Some people are saying that Gen AI is only chatbot. That's even worse.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we should have a separate conversation on that.
Yeah. Okay. So and then agentic tool, we can touch a little bit on it again. So yeah, that's definitely has a value in my opinion too, because even in my own experience, currently we are working on few projects, and uh, it will be nice, like you mentioned, to have that agent some sort of uh, power of understanding the domain, what actions you should take, how to pivot your threat hunting process, like how do you bring all these entities together and understand. And I think this is where the graph technology is evolving, and I'm myself is fascinating to learn a little bit more on graph rag versus the regular rag, how it can present the values. Because in security, as you know, you've been working for a long time, graph definitely has a bigger value, right? So I think those are some of the upcoming train that I'll be probably interested myself, like graph rag, agentic tool, things like that. And as you said, the SLM, how can we fine tune for our purpose? Would be interesting to explore.
Yeah. And I think just to piggyback on what you told,
Yeah,
I'm not nowadays noticing, mostly because, like, at least now I feel like I've been in the industry for some time, right?
right.
What is old is kind of new again. So in the era of doing like better information retrieval, right? People would tag things as like ontology, like very web specific ontology, very domain specific tags for
Yes.
all those resources. And I think that's kind of making a comeback now, like
Yes.
when people are thinking a little more, because now they're realizing that LLMs are great at predicting the next token, but just predicting power does not necessarily equate to reasoning power. And
Hmm.
you need some sort of reinforcement learning, but not just that, but you also need to think about logic, right? And all of those logic comes from that symbolic mathematical background and having domain specific knowledge or ontology, right? So what is old is kind of new again, and it's interesting to see the cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true everywhere. Even in music industry, in AI industry, the retro is gonna be living for a while, I guess. All right, so that was interesting. Let's switch gear a little bit. Blending your life with tech. I like to cover this section with everyone, regardless of who comes to my show. That's because everyone has their own schedule, tight deadlines. We basically we spend a lot of our time for the work, right? And we have to enforce something for ourselves to spend some time to balance in a way. Some people call it work life balance, some call it work life harmony, like Jeff Bezos always highlight. How do you revive yourself, right? So it's just maybe the personal side of you overcoming this challenges of getting busy all the time, stuff like that.
Yeah, work life integration.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to be very honest. I don't know if I have done the best job at this, but I always try. So there are some times where I definitely feel like, in my enthusiasm to try out different things, I may have taken on a bit too much. I definitely feel that. And there are some times where I feel like, oh, maybe I need to add more responsibilities on the work front. So I think even I'm trying to find the balance between the two. And what I definitely would say has worked for me is, I definitely think of, I try to cultivate my work habits around my personal peak performance habits. So
Hmm.
if anybody is interested in, like, understanding how athletes always perform at their best, there's this book called Peak Performance. It's really good. It's about figuring out how you can always give your best performance, but at the same time, what you need to retain that energy and kind of be ready for that kind of best performance, peak performance every single day.
Hmm.
And that's an art, definitely. So what I have found for myself is that there are certain things that I really do enjoy, which is deep work. I don't
Hmm.
know if I can do a great job, juggling a lot of Slack pings and things like that simultaneously, which is everybody's day to day, right? But I know that somehow for me that is disturbing because I feel like I cannot get focused work.
Hmm.
And as knowledge workers, data science, sometimes you have a train of thought going, and then if you just get distracted, you can easily lose that.
Yes.
So for me, I definitely try to be more mindful of the distractions around me, and I kind of structure my days so that I do the most important work during the time that matters the most for me, or like where I'm at my best. That's something that I do. And in terms of family, I think I also have a conversation with the rest of my family members to
Hmm.
sometimes say if they can pick up the slack, like if I want to focus on a particular project and they have a little leeway in their work schedule, then I can ask them for support and see if they can pick up some of the slack. And sometimes it's the other way around. Like if I see my partner struggling in certain things,
Hmm.
I will probably choose some projects where I don't have to be like extremely involved day to day.
Hmm.
So there is a little bit of that decision making that comes into picture. But I can definitely say that I have been burnt out in the past sometimes. I have been extremely stressed. And when I'm doing that, I can feel that, I'm not at my best. I feel like it's the poorest reflection of me as a person. So that's always been a sign to recognize that and just
Yes.
wind things down. I think it's very important to acknowledge that you're not at your best.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very good point. I always tell people that don't be a rubber band, right? So you can stretch it, but you can you may not see the stress right away on that rubber band, how stress it has been holding. It is just definitely, unless you understand, I mean, you may not break right away, but when you get to the breaking point, it might be already too late, right? So that's how it's always important to prioritize things. And you mentioned a really good thing about peak performance. It's always about your productivity time, right? So, and we all have to juggle through meetings, stuff like that. So I try to block my time when I can focus and do work. So definitely utilize that as well. You just have to figure out your
Yeah.
own rhythm
Yeah.
of how to balance things out. All right. So it's been a great conversation. We are coming closer to an end, but I would like to cover two more topics. One is definitely on mentorship and learning. And I know you kind of advocate for that, like, hey, find a good mentor, or, yourself being a mentor to the early career folks as well. So what is the significant difference you have seen, both being as a mentor and mentee, whatever you can talk about on mentorship and learning?
Yeah. I think as a mentee, I try to choose, there's this common notion called choose your board of advisors. So
Hmm.
I tend to follow that notion where I have certain people who I admire a lot for some of the things that they do. They do that really so well
Hmm.
that I definitely want to learn a particular skill from them. So I tend to pick and choose different types of mentors if they will have me, of course. And how do you make these mentors? Sometimes through network, sometimes converting failed interviews to mentorship as well is good.
Yeah.
So I would definitely recommend that. It's worked out for me, but it may also mean that, sometimes you don't get a lot of time with one particular mentor. That's when you have another mentor kind of augment some of your other day-to-day questions. So that would be good. In terms of what I like as being a mentor, I would definitely say I at least like, at least for me, I don't think I want to tell people how I did it. I think I want to tell people how to do it in their way. So that's what really drives me as a mentor because everybody is different. And instead of showing them exactly how I did it and saying, hey, if you follow X, Y, and Z, that's the recipe to success or failure, instead they have their own journey. And I like to help them do it in their way. So I think that's what kind of drives me. And if there's like one nugget in there, I would say it's try to find mentors both within and outside of your organization because sometimes you get a different view and a mirror into the kind of
Yes.
technical skills that you're working on, into the kind of soft skills that you have, into the kind of perspectives that you have, right? So definitely try to get an internal and an external mentor if possible.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's a very good point. I also suggest people to, yeah, not only focus on finding within your own org or close surrounding, right? You just have to extend that radius, like who else you can talk. Because some of these things, even in my own experience, talking to people completely outside of what I know or what I'm familiar with, it just opens up different perspective for me, right? So of viewing things, I even try to find mentors completely outside of cybersecurity, completely outside of data science sometimes. It doesn't really have to be your own field, right? Your mentor can be covering something else, right? Like maybe for the leadership skills. I'm focused on finding a leader who is very successful in different domain. Doesn't really have to be on my own, right? So it's just, yeah, this is very important to consider. You look out,
Yeah.
from other industry as well. All right, so we are coming close. The last thing would be any tips or suggestions, advice you can give it to my viewers or audience based on your own journey. Anything you have the last few words to make it useful for the audience that maybe I will say key takeaways.
Yeah, I think it's like a general advice. I'm not very big on giving advice because, like I just said, I want people to do it their way. But a very general thing that I want to say is focus on the foundations. Like off late, I'm noticing that everybody kind of
Mhm.
wants to get those results immediately. We're always kind of looking for shortcuts and instant gratification, but it's good to kind of focus on the foundations. Like you may not be successful right away, but every skill that you learn will help you in the future at some way. You'll never know when it'll be useful, but it will be useful. So I think that's something that I would recommend. And another aspect in general that I would think would be very valuable for data scientists is I feel like every profession has some common shared traits. And in general, I think data scientists tend to be like very precision oriented, very conscientiousness, like we want to make the best decision. We want to have all the data and the input, and we want to make the best decision. And I absolutely love that love that about us as a profession category. But sometimes during that process of getting all the data, double checking things, we might actually lose out on the bigger picture and the opportunities. So it's good to zoom in and zoom out occasionally. I think that's what I would tell a lot of data scientists looking to enter. Like, yes, absolutely get those technical skills, prove that you can work with them, but sometimes also like don't get too caught up in getting the best correct model or the
Mhm.
best correct answer. Sometimes step back and see, okay, you know what, I think sometimes 99% is absolutely needed and sometimes 80% is good. Like in security we will need 98%, 99% times, but in some other cases not so much. So that's something that I would tell.
Okay, yeah, that's a good advice. Yeah, we being in the data science profession, I felt myself that we get caught up too much around these metrics, right?
Yeah.
So it's always good to be skeptical of all these numbers you see, like does it make sense or not, and try to make a judgment where, yeah, like you said, I mean, accuracy is just one side of the thing, right? When you're building a model. So yeah, so definitely that is a good wrap up for our conversation. I hope our audience have just enjoyed the conversation like I did. It was very pleasure to have you, and thank you again for coming to the show, and I wish you all the best, and we will keep in touch offline for sure.
Absolutely, Nirmal. Thank you so much. And I do hope that all the audience that come to this podcast definitely take away something from this. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
For sure. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.